A boy vanished from a supermarket parking lot in 2006. 17 years later, his mother saw his face and stared at it on a glossy magazine cover. That moment shattered everything. She had done everything right. She stood between the grocery aisle and the checkout, bread in hand, eyes on her son. She told him to wait by the cart. She turned to grab a loaf of bread. When she turned back, the cart sat empty. No child, no sound, just silence and an echo in her chest. Minutes later, a detective crouched by the abandoned cart. There was no struggle, no signs of forced entry. Nothing but a red backpack left behind, zipper closed tight. Her breath rattled in her ears. No CCTV, no witnesses, just an empty space and that sickening thrum of fear. 10 days later, the backpack was found in a ditch, unblemished. Inside lay the boy's school ID, his smiling photo, a pressed daisy, and a note reading, "He watches." The words were chilling, simple, profound, inexplicable. Something told her this wasn't random, not a rampage, but something deliberate. The red backpack became the heartbeat of every sleepless night that followed. She started wearing the boy's sweater to bed. She'd relive the moment she heard the cart roll away from her. A voicemail from her voicemail. She pressed play again. That heartbeat. Her heart jangled like a bell. 17 years later, she scanned the magazine aisle. A crime feature caught her eye. The cover stared back at her, older, grown, yet unmistakably him. He had that scar. His jawline. His eyes held something deeper now. The weight of absence. She froze as tears welled up. That boy was alive. Detective Marco Diaz returned to mystery. He confirmed the photo had been taken 2 months earlier. The magazine offered no explanation. The byline, Lisa Monroe. No background, no record. Just a photo and a haunting story about survivors of psychological experimentation. The coincidence was impossible. Jake had to be him. The magazine production team was unreachable. Emails bounced. Walls of silence. She begged Diaz to follow the trail, wherever it led. That night, she dreamed of a hallway she'd never seen. Jake's voice called, soft and distant, "Mom?" She reached a room bathed in blue light. There he sat, a boy born from shadows. A single thought emerged. He remembered. He always remembered. She awoke to find a pressed daisy on her windowsill, the same one from the backpack. Her breath caught. Her fingers trembled. Someone was sending messages. She wasn't ready, and yet she was exactly who they needed. Diaz unearthed an old interview, recorded in 2010. The voice trembled and cracked as the interviewer asked Lisa Monroe if the boy in the photo had spoken. Monroe paused, then whispered one word, "Echo." It was like a puzzle piece shifting into place. Something dark was at work, something designed to overwrite memory, identity, autonomy. Ella cried into the pillow that night, overwhelmed by grief, guilt, hope. 17 years. For seasons, 17 birthdays, 17 birthdays. Her heart never stopped searching, never stopped hoping. She returned to that parking lot the next morning. The asphalt was fresh, but her memories were not. She closed her eyes and pictured him, heard the cart, felt the guilt, walked the aisles, each one a corridor of memory and loss. She told the empty air, "I'm coming for you, baby." She pinned the magazine photo beside the old school picture, side by side. He had grown, but he looked right at her. He looked at her. Between the two images, she whispered, "It's really you." It must be. Detective Diaz traced the email trail to an address in Baltimore. They found an abandoned apartment from which photos once posted by Lisa Monroe had disappeared. They found chilling snapshots, children in waiting, photos circled in red, faces erased. Names forgotten but remembered. The red circle around Jake's face was unmistakable. Inside, they discovered a note. Some children weren't lost. They were borrowed. He collects stories, but only she makes them true. LM. They played a cassette taped by a retired agent. Lisa Monroe's voice, trembling, said the magazine article was dictated by someone else. The voice answered to the name Echo. Ella pressed her fingers to her lips. Echo. A whisper. A warning. The name her son no longer responded to alone. She watched the mailbox for letters, for clues. She listened for humming. A lullaby, a trigger buried deep. She recalled the words she sang to her son. The daisy boy walked through the night, holding dreams in fields of white. That song was older than she remembered, perhaps older than she could imagine. Behind the mailbox one day, she found a memory card hidden in the foliage. On it, a video of a boy sitting on the edge of a blue-walled room. He spoke in a low voice. This is not where I live. This is where I'm kept. If you're seeing this, then she opened the magazine. Tell her I remember the word. I remember the daisy. Her breath caught. Her world shifted. He was alive. He remembered her. He remembered her voice, her song. This is the beginning of her journey to bring him back. The wind whispered through the alley behind Ella's home, the same one her son used to ride his bike through every afternoon before dinner. She stood there that morning with a printout of the magazine cover in one hand, the other resting on her chest like she was trying to keep her heart from escaping. The boy's face on the glossy page haunted her now, so familiar yet changed. A different haircut, older eyes, but the same soul she carried inside her for 9 months and spent 17 years aching for. She couldn't sleep after seeing that face. Her kitchen was littered with coffee mugs and newspaper clippings. On the wall, the missing persons flyer from 2006 had been pinned for years, corners curled, colors faded. She pulled it down for the first time in a decade and held it beside the magazine cover. There was no doubt it was him. The mole beneath his left eye, the scar above his eyebrow from the time he'd fallen off the swing. These things couldn't be faked. She called Diaz again. His voice came slow and careful. He'd seen too many mothers hoping, too many false alarms. But even he couldn't deny it anymore. It's him, she said. I know it. And in that pause, she heard it in his breath. He believed her. Diaz dug into the magazine's metadata, eventually tracing it back to a freelance photographer named Victor Rell, someone who hadn't published in years. The lead took them to a shuttered home outside Flagstaff. Windows boarded, mail untouched. In the backyard, a forgotten sandbox and a tricycle half swallowed by grass. Inside, everything was covered in dust, except the darkroom. That place was clean, fresh, active. On the walls were dozens of photographs, faces of children, eyes blurred, names erased. But in the center, one was left untouched. The boy from the magazine, labeled in sharp ink, number 41 subject, Echo. That name again. Ella stood before the photo and whispered, "What did they do to you?" She touched the image gently. Her fingers trembled. In a drawer nearby, they found a stack of tapes, labeled by year. One stood out, 2007. She pressed play. A child's voice hummed a lullaby, the same Daisy song she'd once sung while tucking him in. It was off-key, slower, but it was him. Then another voice entered, cold and clinical. Subject 41 demonstrates emotional recall beyond expected thresholds. Attachment to primary figure, coded mother, remains embedded despite restructuring efforts. Recommend memory suppression intensification. Echo loop to resume. Ella covered her mouth, eyes wide. They hadn't just taken him. They'd tried to erase her from his mind. Diaz stopped the tape. That night, She sat on her porch with a tape recorder in her lap, listening to that voice again and again. Not the doctor's. Her son's. That voice that used to call for her when he woke up from bad dreams. That voice that used to sing to the stars from the back seat of her car. It hadn't changed as much as she thought. It was still him. And he remembered. The next morning, an envelope appeared on her doorstep. No postage. No return address. Inside was a single photo, grainy, black and white. Her son, walking out of a facility. A largie stamped on the wall behind him. And a note on the back. He wakes up at dawn. 3rd floor. West wing. Red door. She turned it over again. The message was clear. Someone wanted her to find him. Someone inside. Diaz scanned the photo and matched the wall design to an abandoned research center in northern Nevada. Officially, it had been closed since 2009. Unofficially, it was used for behavioral monitoring. Whatever that meant. They packed bags. Left quietly. The less said, the safer he would be. The facility loomed like a concrete wound against the horizon. Fences still stood. Cameras still blinked. But there were no guards. Just rust, wind, and silence. They moved through the corridors slowly. The air inside smelled like metal and decay. Floor tiles cracked under their feet. Most rooms were empty. A few held remains of medical equipment. IVs, restraints, echo chambers. And then they reached it. A red door. She froze. Her hand shook as she touched the knob. It was warm. Someone had been here recently. Inside, a small bed. A desk. A shelf. Drawings covered the walls. Daisies, stars, and the same cartoon fox he'd loved as a child. On the desk, a voice recorder. She pressed play. If you're my mother, if you're really her, then you'll know the Daisy song. You'll know what I named the fox. You'll remember the day it rained on my birthday and we had cake on the floor. If you know that, then I'll believe you. Tears ran down her face. She whispered to the room. Your fox was named Indigo. The frosting was blue. You laughed until you hiccuped. And I sang, The Daisy Boy Walked Through the Night. The door behind her creaked. Footsteps. She turned. And there he stood, older, taller, gaunt, but his eyes, they were his father's eyes. Her eyes. He didn't move. Neither did she. Then, slowly he stepped forward. He reached out, touched her cheek. You remember the cake, he whispered. She nodded, unable to speak. And then he collapsed into her arms. After 17 years, she held her son again. But this wasn't the end. Because behind the red door, inside a false wall, Diaz found records. Dozens of files. Names, dates, experiment logs. Project Echo wasn't about one boy. It was hundreds. And they were still out there. They didn't speak for a long time. She just held him. Her son. A 17-year silence between them. Heavy as lead, slowly cracked open. He smelled like antiseptic and dust. But underneath it all, she could still find the faintest scent of childhood. The shampoo he used to spill, the warmth of the fleece pajamas he loved. He leaned back just enough to look at her. I used to dream of you, he said, his voice hoarse and strained. But they said you weren't real. Ella ran her fingers through his matted hair. You were always real to me. Diaz stood by the door, eyes scanning the room, heart pounding. They couldn't stay long. Whoever left that envelope might have bought them time, but it wouldn't last. He motioned for them to move. They walked through the hallway in silence. Jake, she dared to think his name again, stayed close. He flinched at every echo, every creak. The deeper they moved, the more signs they found. Empty patient rooms, journals with pages torn out, one scribbled message burned into a wall with black marker. They are not just watching. They are learning. Diaz found a small operations room, dust-covered but powered. A flickering terminal blinked green. The system still ran. He tapped through files, most encrypted, but one folder sat open. Echo_project_logs_1999, 2016. He clicked. A list of names filled the screen. Children from all over. Notes beside each. Memory extraction initiated. Identity fracture achieved. Emotional anchor resistant. Reprocessing scheduled. Ella scanned the list until she saw it. Jacob Allen Foster. Her breath caught. Next to his name, subject 41. Memory loop failed. Emotional bond remains. That one line told her everything. They tried to delete me from you, she whispered. Jake nodded. I didn't let them. There were other files. Images, grainy footage of sessions. Children talking to mirrored walls, reciting phrases, answering questions that made no sense. In one video, a boy whispered, "The door isn't locked, it's watching." Diaz pulled a USB from his coat and copied what he could. The computer beeped in protest. Then a new message flashed across the screen. Unauthorized copy detected. Protocol Echo Prime initiated. A countdown began. 30 seconds. They ran. Alarm shrieked. The hallway lights flickered red, casting long shadows across the walls. Jake stumbled once. Ella caught him. Her body, aged 17 years by grief and waiting, surged with strength. They burst through a side door just as the facility's metal gates slammed shut behind them. Outside, the air tasted like freedom. They didn't speak on the drive. Jake stared out the window. Ella watched his reflection in the glass. He didn't look back at her, but she knew he felt it. The invisible tether between them still held. Later that night, in a safe house, he sat by the window. They put us in colors, he said. Every kid had a color. I was red. Red meant I didn't forget easy. They said I was infected with mother code. She sat beside him. You weren't infected. You were loved. He didn't respond, just stared at the stars. Where are the others? She asked softly. I don't know. They moved us around. But we talked when we could, whispered through vents, passed messages and drawings. Do you remember names? He nodded. Liam, Mari, Bethany, Ezra. She wrote them down. We'll find them too, she said. But Jake shook his head. Some are gone. I don't mean missing. I mean gone. Like erased from inside. Like they forgot they were ever kids. Ella fought the tears. She had her son. But how many mothers never would? Diaz entered with the laptop. I cracked a few more files. One contained audio, a meeting between two researchers. One voice, calm and confident, said, if you anchor a subject too deeply in emotional memory, they resist the loop. But if you fracture that anchor early, before language fully forms, they become pliable. The mother code is the strongest variable, but even that can be undone with time. Ella clenched her fists. Monsters, she whispered. Diaz found coordinates in one log entry. Another site, possibly still active. Ella looked at Jake. Are you ready? His eyes were haunted, but steady. They didn't break me, he said. They only paused me. Together, they packed. Because this wasn't the end of the story. This was the beginning of the reckoning. That night, as Ella watched her son sleep for the first time in nearly 2 decades, she whispered to the darkness, they stole our years, but not our love. And somewhere in the quiet, the world shifted. The sun barely crested over the Nevada hills when they left the safe house. Ella sat in the back seat with her son beside her, watching him sleep, just like she used on long drives to visit her sister in Michigan. But this wasn't a family road trip. This was a hunt through shadows, a journey into the belly of a machine that stole children and called it science. Diaz had mapped out the route. The coordinates from the echo files led to an unregistered site buried deep in Utah desert, a place never mentioned by name, only by designation. Echo 6. No roads led there directly. Only dirt paths, old mining roads, and a silence that made the sky feel heavy. Ella didn't speak much during the drive, but inside her mind churned. With every mile, she remembered more, not just her own pain, but the mothers she'd met in the early days, the ones who'd lost children, too. Some vanished in parks, others from their own beds. All of them told they were unlucky, all of them made to feel crazy. Now she knew better. They hadn't imagined it. The children were taken for a purpose, and that purpose still breathed behind concrete walls in the desert. When they reached the edge of the salt flats, Jake stirred. He blinked against the sun and sat up slowly, his hands twitching against the seatbelt. "We're close," he said. Not a question, a certainty. Ella turned to him. "How do you know?" He didn't answer. He just pointed to the horizon. "It feels like the old air." Diaz looked over his shoulder. "What does that mean?" Jake's voice was low. The air they used to pump in the rooms. Sterile, dry, like electricity waiting to bite you. They drove another hour, passing dry riverbeds and rusted machinery. Finally, at the base of a ridge, the car stopped. Ahead was nothing but rock, until Jake stepped out and walked toward the cliff. There, hidden by the shadows of the bluff, was a thin crevice in the stone, a vent humming softly. He touched it. "This is it," he whispered. They called it the clean place. Diaz unpacked the gear, cameras, flashlights, a drone. He handed Ella a small voice recorder. In case anything happens. They moved quietly into the crevice. Just beyond it, a shaft led down into darkness. Rusted metal stairs groaned beneath their weight. The temperature dropped sharply. The silence became unbearable. Then a door, stainless steel, unmarked. Jake hesitated. Then he reached forward and entered a code on the keypad, 4-1-7-9. The door clicked. "How did you know that?" Ella asked. Jake's eyes didn't leave the door. "They made us memorize it. They said if we ever left and came back, the door would still know us." The facility on the other side was not abandoned. It was immaculate. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly. White walls, white floors, and the faint scent of antiseptic and lavender, artificial comfort. They moved cautiously. In one room, a play area, blocks stacked into pyramids, dolls lined up in perfect rows, a chalkboard with the phrase, "Feeling is freedom," written over and over again. Jake stepped back. This is where they taught us to forget. In another room, they found files, names, ages, some with photos, each labeled with a color, red, blue, yellow. Ella's breath caught. There, in one folder, was a name she recognized from the list Jake gave her. Bethany Rose. Age 4. Status. Incomplete detachment. Recommendation. Echo suppression. Stage 2. Her photo was paper-clipped. A sweet smile. Big eyes. A bruise faintly visible on her jaw. Ella held it in her hands like it was a holy relic. "Where is she?" she whispered. Diaz opened more files. The same pattern. Dozens of children. Experiment notes. Journal entries from someone identified only as Dr. M. Then a surveillance monitor came on. For screens. For rooms. Each one with a child. Alone. One girl rocked slowly in the corner, humming to herself. A boy stared into the wall. Another child drew circles over and over on the floor. Jake stared. "That's Mari." He ran toward the door labeled control. Inside, a panel of buttons and a mic. Jake picked it up. "Mari," he said. "It's me?" "Red." On the screen, the girl looked up, slowly. Then she stood. She walked toward the camera and whispered, "I knew you'd come back." Jake hit the unlock switch. But nothing happened. Lockdown. Diaz cursed under his breath. They moved control elsewhere. Ella turned and saw it. Behind a glass wall, a dark figure, watching, then gone. Someone was still here. They moved deeper. Hallways grew narrower. Lights flickered. Then they found the room. It wasn't marked, but inside it looked like a shrine. Walls covered in photos. Children at various ages. Then the same children older, stiffer, colder. Then again younger, as if time had been manipulated. A journal sat open on the desk. Ella picked it up. It read, "Echo is not just about memory. It is about belief. If you can make a child believe they were never loved, you can make them believe anything." She dropped the book. Jake sat down. His hands shook. "I used to believe I was nothing, just a number. But you were the dream I held on to." They stayed there for a while, until Diaz called out, "I found her." Mari, in a locked chamber at the far end of the hall. She was barely 10, skin pale, eyes wide, but she ran to Jake and didn't hesitate. He held her like a brother should, but then footsteps, echoing, not from one person, from many. Diaz slammed the emergency alarm. "We need to move. Now." Lights turned red. A voice boomed over the intercom. "Return the subjects." Ella grabbed Jake's hand. He carried Mari. They ran, through corridors, past the white walls, toward the only exit they knew. A siren wailed. Doors began to close behind them. Thick steel slabs slamming into place. They made it to the shaft, climbed, out into the light, out into the real air. They didn't stop running until the sky turned orange and the mountains stood behind them like silent witnesses. In the safe house that night, Mari sat beside Ella. "Are you my mom now?" she asked. Ella smiled. "I can be if you want me to." Mari nodded once, and for the first time in years, she fell asleep in peace. But Ella knew this wasn't the end, because the voices in the dark still whispered, and someone, somewhere, still believed Echo was worth continuing. In the soft light of morning, they moved again. The safe house was no longer safe. Not after Ella saw headlights sweep too slowly across the curtains. Not after Mari whispered in her sleep, "They're here." They drove without speaking. Diaz behind the wheel, eyes locked on the rear view. Ella cradling Mari in the back seat. Jake sat beside them, wide awake, watching the road. Something in him had changed. The fear had faded. And in its place, a quiet fire. At sunrise, they crossed into Colorado. Snow dusted the hills. The cold seeped through the glass, but no one complained. It felt better than the sterile warmth of the Echo facility, better than the hum of machines trying to rewrite memories. They stopped at an abandoned ranger station off the highway. Diaz had found it years ago, a place with no records, no utilities, just wood and wind and silence. Inside, they lit a fire. Ella found a dusty notebook in the cabinet. She handed it to Jake. He opened it slowly, then began to draw. Nothing grand, just simple things. A fox, a daisy, a slice of birthday cake. Memory anchors, he called them. Mari watched him, and then with a trembling hand, picked up a pencil. She drew a door, read. Jake's eyes widened. "That was my door, too," he said. Mari nodded. "They said if we ever crossed it, we'd vanish." Ella leaned in. "Did you ever cross?" Mari looked down. "I think I did once. But when I came back, my friend Ezra was gone." Jake went still. Ezra. He remembered the name. A boy with big ideas and a voice that cracked when he sang. They used to whisper stories through the vents. Ezra believed they'd escape one day. Said he could feel his mom's prayers through the walls. But then one morning, Ezra was just gone. No goodbye, no transfer, nothing, just erased. Jake turned to Diaz. We have to go back. Ella looked up. Jake. No, he said. There are more. Kids like me. Kids like Mari. We can't just run and hide. Diaz exhaled slowly. I thought you'd say that. From his bag, he pulled out a printed folder, maps, photos, satellite scans. Another echo site, buried deeper, disguised as a medical research lab. Official name, Weaver Genetics Institute. Unofficial, Echo 12. Ella scanned the documents. Why didn't you tell us? Because you needed rest, and because... Diaz paused. I wasn't sure I could protect you again. Jake put a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to. Just help us find the others. They left at nightfall. Ella watched the sky darken through the window. Her fingers gently tangled in Mari's hair. The girl had begun to speak more. Short words, names, colors. She asked questions, too. Did I have a mom before? Ella never had an answer, but she always said, you do now. When they reached the outskirts of the Echo 12 compound, they parked 3 miles away and hiked the rest. Snow crunched beneath their boots. The air tasted of iron and pine. The facility sat beneath a fake ski lodge, a gleaming wooden facade that masked the horror below. The entrance was coded, but Jake remembered the rhythm of the keypads. The order sounds. Diaz bypassed the system. The door clicked. They entered. Inside, silence. Not abandoned. Not fully. There were signs of movement. Fresh footprints. A kettle warm on the burner in the kitchen. Files laid out on a table. Mari stopped suddenly. She pointed down the hallway. That's where they kept the mirrors. Jake whispered, observation rooms. The corridor led to a series of chambers, glass-lined cells where children were studied like animals. Each had a chair, a light, a speaker in the ceiling. One still held a teddy bear. Another had tally marks carved into the wall. Hundreds of them. Ella stepped into the last room and saw a journal left behind. She opened it. Inside were crude drawings. Faces with empty eyes, doors that floated in space, stairs that led nowhere. At the end, a message scrawled in thick pencil. I dream of water. I dream of drowning. I dream of waking up dry. Make it stop. She closed the journal and wiped a tear. Diaz called out from the lab. I found something. They gathered around computer, old but running. He pulled up footage dated 2010. Ezra, on the screen, alive. He was older than Jake remembered. Maybe 12, sitting in a chair, wires on his scalp. His hands shook. A voice off-screen said, What do you remember? Ezra whispered, My mother sings when she folds the laundry. My father whistles off-key. My sister's name is Wren. Then he began to scream. The screen went black. Jake backed away. They punished him for remembering. Ella whispered. They feared love. Diaz scrolled through more files. He found coordinates. Hidden under a scrambled name. Echo_null. No designation. No labels. No location. Just raw numbers. Deep forest. Appalachia. Jake looked at the map. That's where they took the ones they couldn't break. A cold settled over the room. Mari whispered, That's where the shadows live. They didn't wait. There was no more waiting left in them. They drove for 2 days with little sleep. The Appalachian would stretch wide before them, a rolling, endless sea of trees that held secrets older than language. Roads became thinner. Signs grew rarer. Phone signals vanished altogether. At night, they camped in silence. The wind made strange music through the pine. Mari clung to Ella's arm. Jake watched the stars like they might speak. Echo_null wasn't on any map. No buildings, no trails, only the raw coordinates buried deep in the encrypted files. But they all felt it, that growing weight in the air, the cold that didn't come from weather. On the third day, the forest opened. Ahead of them stood a structure that didn't belong. Not a building, a hatch, rust-eaten and bolted, and buried in the side of a wooded hill. Vines had tried to reclaim it. Moss coated the seams. But when Diaz ran his fingers over the keypad, it blinked to life. Still powered. Jake stepped forward and typed. Not numbers. Letters. WREN. The hatch released a sigh. Then opened. The air that greeted them was wrong. Thick, metallic, and faintly sweet. Like memory and blood. They climbed down a steel ladder into the dark. Below, a hallway. Long, narrow. Flickering lights lined the ceiling, barely alive. Dust floated like ash. Ella held Mari close. Stay behind me, she whispered. Jake led the way. He didn't hesitate. Something in his body remembered these walls. Some ghost muscle memory guiding his feet. The corridor opened into a vast chamber. No rooms, no walls, just rows and rows of chairs. Hundreds, each one facing a massive screen, cracked now but still pulsing faint light. On the chairs sat, not people, not anymore, dolls, made from cloth and wire. Some wore name tags. Others had scars stitched into their faces. Many held notebooks. Some had real hair. All of them sat still, watching the screen. Mari gasped. Jake whispered, training room. They walked between the rows, careful not to disturb anything. On the screen, static flickered. Then, a voice. Welcome back. Diaz turned sharply. Ella's breath caught. The voice continued. Echo_null was never meant to be found. And yet, here you are. Curious things. Survivors. Jake stared at the ceiling. Who are you? The voice didn't answer. Instead, a door slid open at the end of the chamber, and the lights went out. Only the red emergency bulbs remained. They stepped forward, into the next room. This one was colder, clinical, lined with glass cases. Inside, personal objects. A sock puppet, a broken toy truck, a pair of child's shoes with blue laces, a photograph of a woman holding a baby. The date, 1993. Ella reached out and touched the glass. It was her, holding Jake. Same photo she had at home. She turned to him. They kept this. Jake nodded slowly, because they erased everything else. They moved deeper into the compound. Then, another hallway. Along one wall, portraits, children's faces, some smiling, some blank, some crying. Above them, the words, property of program Echo, null set. Mari froze. That's me? Her portrait was small, torn at the edges, eyes wide with fear. And beside it, a journal entry scrawled on the wall itself. Subject 9, Bia's failed detachment trial. Displays abnormal bonding behavior. Reassignment pending. Jake looked to the side. His face was there too. Subject 4A. Escape during phase withdrawal. Mark for reclamation. Do not engage without sedation. Ella clenched her fists. They catalog you like livestock. Diaz stepped forward, shining his flashlight. And there, at the end of the hall, a metal door. On it, a name carved into the steel. Dr. M. Wren. Jake stared. His voice cracked. Ezra said she was the architect. They opened the door. Inside, a study, not a lab, not a prison. A warm wood-paneled room with bookshelves, lamps, and a crackling fireplace. And in the center, a woman. Old now, frail, sitting in a chair, hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked up and smiled. I was wondering when you'd arrive. Jake stepped forward. You're Wren. She nodded once. I prefer Dr. Wren. But yes, I'm the one you're here to blame. Diaz raised his weapon. Get up. She didn't move. Everything is already gone, she said. You're too late to stop it, but not too late to understand. Ella's voice was like thunder. You stole our children. Wren met her eyes. No, I reimagined them. Jake took a step closer. Why? Wren's smile faded. Because the world was dying. Not from war. Not from climate. From despair. From loneliness. I believed if we could remove attachment, remove memory, we could build something better. Children who didn't mourn, who didn't ache. Mari whispered. We still ached. Wren looked at her gently. I know. Silence filled the room. Then a screen lit up beside the fireplace. Footage played. Children in rows. Repeating phrases. Coloring pictures without emotion. Walking in circles. Ella turned away. I want it all shut down, Jake said. Wren didn't fight. She handed over a key. Vault in the back. Hard drives. Journals. Burn them if you must. But know this, the idea will live on. Ideas always do. Diaz took the key and left. Jake lingered. What happened to Ezra? Wren looked at the fire. He refused a wipe, so we gave him the forest. He lives there still. With the others. They call it the Sleepwood now. Jake blinked. He's alive. Wren nodded. But he remembers everything. Jake turned. He didn't say goodbye. Ella and Mari followed. They walked out the chamber, past the dolls, past the portraits, into the cold night. Behind them, the facility began to shake. Diaz had lit the fire. An echo under Scornell began to die. Smoke curled into the night sky as the fire consumed what was left of Echo under Scornell. No alarms, no sirens, just a slow, deliberate unraveling. A place built to erase the truth, now vanishing into ash. But the children, those who remained, were not gone. They were out there, living under false names, working in towns that never questioned, hiding behind smiles that never reached their eyes. And in a stretch of untouched forest known only by whispers, one of them waited. Ezra. Jake hadn't spoken since the fire. He sat beside Mari in the back of the van as they drove deeper into Appalachia. Ella watched him through the mirror. Something had cracked open in him. Something ancient. Grief that had been folded into him like bone. Now it burned beneath the surface. They stopped at the last marked road before the forest swallowed the signal. From here, they would walk. Diaz handed each of them a compass. If you get lost, follow the moss, he said. North-facing trees. Mari tugged Ella's hand. Will he remember me? Ella knelt beside her. If he's anything like Jake, he never forgot. They moved in single file through the woods, following the thin trail between the trees. No bird sang here. No wind stirred. Just the crunch of their boots and the slow, steady thud of heartbeats trying not to race. After 2 hours, they found it. The clearing. Rusted fencing surrounded it, almost invisible beneath the ivy and branches. Beyond the fence, old wooden cabins slouched in the dirt like tired men. A single wire stretched across the camp, hung with faded tin cans, makeshift alarms. Jake stepped forward. Ezra, he called. It's me. Red. Silence. Then, a kin rattled. From the trees, a figure emerged. Thin, hooded, holding a bough. He stared at them with cold eyes. Jake whispered, Ezra? The figure pulled back his hood. Ezra, but not the boy Jake remembered. This was a man, scarred, silent, and in his eyes, memories too dark to speak. Ezra lowered the bough slowly. I knew you'd come back, he said. His voice was deeper now, but familiar. Jake stepped forward. I looked for you. I tried. Ezra raised a hand. Not here. Inside. They followed him into the cabin. It smelled with smoke and damp earth. A kettle hissed on a small stove. A worn map was pinned to the wall, covered in red string and pins. Faces were drawn in the margins. Some crossed out, some circled. Ezra poured tea into chip mugs and handed them out like a ritual. No one spoke until the steam faded. Then Ella asked, "How long have you been here?" Ezra sat. 17 years. Since I walked out of Echo with a sedative still in my spine. He glanced at Jake. I thought you were dead. Jake shook his head. I thought you were. Mari stood close to Ella, holding her hand. Ezra looked at the girl and frowned. She's one of them? She's one of us, Ella said gently. Ezra stared at the fire. I've seen others. Not many. A few over the years. Most don't remember who they are. They wander. Some make it out. Some don't. Diaz stepped forward. We want to help them. Find them. Bring them back. Ezra laughed, low and hollow. There is no back. He stood and pulled a tattered notebook from the shelf. This is what I've learned. Names. Coordinates. Places they sent us. He opened it to a page covered in numbers. There's a town, not far from here. You won't find it on GPS called St. Bridget's Hollow. Jake blinked. That was in the files. A relocation site. Ezra nodded. It's more than that. It's where they sent the ones who refused to forget, but were too dangerous to keep. Diaz took the notebook. We'll go. Ezra hesitated. You won't like what you find. They left before dawn. Ezra didn't follow. I belong here, he said. But if you find Wren again, make sure she stays gone. As they hiked out of the woods, Jake looked back one last time. Ezra stood in the clearing, bow in hand, watching them disappear. St. Bridget's Hollow wasn't marked, but they found it, a town tucked between the hills, blanketed in fog, with signs that hadn't been repainted in years. No gas stations, no cell towers, just an old church, a diner, and a general store. They parked on the edge and walked in like strangers. Locals stared, eyes too long on Mari, on Jake. Ella leaned to Diaz. They recognized something. At the diner, they sat at a booth near the back. A waitress brought coffee without asking, then whispered, "Get out. They don't forget." Jake leaned forward. "Please, do you know what this place is?" She blinked fast. "Not here. Not now." She slid a napkin onto the table. On it, a name. Clara Voss. Used to run the school. She's the only one left who talks. The waitress vanished into the kitchen. They found Clara in a small farmhouse at the edge of the hollow. She answered the door in slippers, holding a cat. Her eyes were sharp, her voice clear. "I knew someone would come eventually," she said. Inside, the walls were covered in old photos. Children, class pictures, smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. Ella pointed. "That's Jake." Clara nodded. "And that's Mari. And that one over there, he died in '09. They said he got pneumonia, but I knew better." Diaz spoke gently. "What was this place?" Clara set down her tea. "A test bed for the ones they couldn't fully detach. They brought them here, gave them fake families, monitored them, watched what love did to them." Jake's voice cracked. "And what did it do?" Clara looked at him. It gave them nightmares, but it also gave them hope. She opened a drawer and pulled out a tape. Last one they ever sent. From Wren. She wanted it buried, but I kept it. Diaz grabbed a player from the van. They sat and listened as the tape clicked to life. Wren's voice. "Calm. Cold. The hollow is failing. Attachment is stronger than we modeled. Some of them are remembering too much. We may need to shut it down. Erase the subjects. Regrow. Jake clenched his fists. Mari leaned into Ella's side. Clara looked out the window. They were going to burn it down. Start again. Ella stood. Not this time. They left Clara with the tape. Then they walked back into the center of town, where the fog had started to lift. A few locals watched from behind curtains. Jake turned to Mari. Do you remember this place? She nodded slowly. My shoes were always wet. Jake knelt beside her. Do you want to leave? Mari looked at the houses, the church, the diner. Then she looked at Ella. I already did. They drove out as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time. And behind them, St. Bridget Hollow vanished into mist. But Jake knew the past doesn't stay buried. It waits, breathes, and sometimes it comes back wearing someone else's face. The fog hadn't followed them out of St. Bridget Hollow, but something else had. Ella could feel it in the silence that followed, in the way Mari refused to look out the windows, in how Jake stared ahead, jaw clenched, like he'd remembered something he couldn't put back. They stayed in a motel that night, cheap, dusty, half-abandoned, the kind of place where time seemed to stall. Diaz triple-checked the locks. Jake sat by the window, flipping through Clara Voss's photographs again. He traced the outlines of children's faces, ones he recognized, others he didn't. One photo in particular made him stop. A girl, hair like fire, eyes sharp with mischief. He turned it over. One word written on the back, Cass. He remembered that name. She used to smuggle candy in her sleeves, hide messages in library books. She'd once drawn a full escape tunnel in chalk behind a mess hall at Echo, complete with blueprints, guard rotations, and a cartoon of Wren falling into a pit. Jake whispered she believed in getting out. Ella leaned over. Is she still there? She was too smart to get caught. Jake said, if she's alive, she might be the last one. Mari sat beside him, flipping pages. Then she froze. A picture of children in a classroom. Behind them, a whiteboard, written on it in faint marker. You are not your memories. You are your programming. Mari stared at the photo for a long time. I wrote that. Jake turned to her, startled. You did. She nodded. They told me to. Every day. Diaz stepped into the room. I found her. They all looked up. Diaz tossed manila folder on the bed. Inside, surveillance stills, DMV records, a college application. Cass. Real name, Cassandra Beller. Now 23. Living under a false identity. And teaching at a small school in Illinois. She disappeared at 16, Diaz said. No family. No background. But she shows up 3 months after the Echo fires, under a new name. Jake stood. We're going. The drive took a day and a half. Cass's school was tucked behind a sleepy strip mall, a red brick building with a fading sign that read Windsor Learning Center. Children's voices echoed from inside. Jake didn't wait. He walked into the front office and asked for her by name. The secretary pointed to a room at the end of the hall. She's subbing today. Room 12. Jake knocked gently. The door opened, and there she was, older, wiser, but the spark in her eyes hadn't changed. She froze, stared at Jake, and whispered, no way. Then she stepped forward and hugged him so hard he nearly fell backward. They didn't speak at first, just sat on the playground after school, sharing stories between quiet tears and nervous laughs. I knew you'd make it, she said. I told everyone. They said you were gone. But I knew. Jake looked down. I wasn't okay for a long time. Me neither, she said. Still not. Ella watched from a bench as Mari fed squirrels nearby. Cass glanced toward them. Is she? Jake nodded. They hurt her. Cass sighed. They hurt all of us. Then Jake leaned in. There are more. He explained everything. Ezra, the hollow, Echo Underskull, the tapes, Ren. Cass listened, eyes wide but steady. When he finished, she stood up. I kept something, she said. Something I wasn't supposed to. Back at her apartment. She pulled a box from the closet. Inside, an external drive. Marked only with a single word. Seed. Jake plugged it in. Dozens of folders. Audio recordings. Patient logs. Facility maps. But one stood out. A video. Cass hesitated before playing it. Ren made us watch this on our last day. Before we were released. The screen flickered. Then Ren, standing in a white room. No lab coat. No notes. Just her voice. You are the seed. You are the test. The world is the soil. You either take root or rot. They will forget you. The world will not remember what we did, but you will remember each other. And that is both your curse and your gift. Cass turned off the screen. I watched that every night for 2 years, she said, until I stopped crying when I heard it. Jake looked at the folders again. What is this one? A file labeled Delta Branch. Cass frowned. I never opened it. Diaz clicked. Inside, photos. Surveillance of an unknown facility. Different from the others. Not underground. Not disguised. A school. Beautiful. Modern. Pristine. Children played in the courtyard. Every face wore a smile. Ella leaned closer. They look perfect. Cass said, That's because they are. She paused. There were rumors. That Echo was building a new prototype. Something beyond detachment. Not just kids without memory, but kids without fear, without grief. Programmed with artificial joy. Jake stared at the screen. You mean they finally got it right? Diaz whispered. Or so they think. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Jake spoke. I want to go there. Ella looked at him. We just found peace. Jake shook his head. There is no peace until they stop. Cass reached over and grabbed his hand. Then we go together. Mari looked up. I'm not scared anymore. Diaz closed the laptop. Then it's decided. Outside, the wind shifted. The leaves turned. And far away, in a place not yet marked on any map, the children of Delta Branch sang their morning songs. Never knowing the shadows that built their world were still watching. And never guessing, the survivors were coming. Delta Branch sat deep in the Ozarks. Far from cities, carved into folds amidst covered valleys, wrapped in silence. It didn't look like a facility. It looked like a private academy built for the children kings. White stone walls, flowering gardens, security disguised as serenity. There were no fences, no towers, no guards in uniform. But cameras moved like blinking eyes. Every corner was watched, every moment monitored. The van rolled to stop on a ridge that overlooked the campus. Jake stepped out first. He stared down at the school through binoculars. Children played on bright green lawns. Some painted. Some sang. All smiled with mechanical ease, like someone had fine-tuned their joy to a dial. He lowered the binoculars slowly. They don't know they're prisoners, he said. Cass nodded. That's the point. Ella adjusted Mari's coat. The wind had changed. Colder. Heavier. Diaz unfolded a map on the hood of the van. This is where it gets dangerous, he said. We're not dealing with shadows anymore. This place is active, protected. If we go in, there's no guarantee we come out. No one backed away. Because the truth was, it had never been about safety. It had always been about ending what should have never started. Cass led the way. She knew how these places worked. knew that hidden entrances were always built for emergencies, not escape. That somewhere near the perimeter, there'd be a maintenance tunnel or a staff access route. She scanned the blueprints Wren had once made her memorize. Then she stopped at a bend in the trail where moss covered the rocks. Here, Jake pulled back the ivy. Beneath it, a lock grate. They pried it open with a crowbar, crawled through one by one. The tunnel led them into darkness. Not cold, warm, sterile. Walls hummed with quiet power. Lights blinked overhead. They were inside. Cass took a breath. Stay low. Stay silent. They won't expect anyone to come from underneath. They passed beneath classrooms where children sat cross-legged, repeating phrases in perfect sync. Past labs where researchers in white coats nodded at monitors. Past glass corridors filled with floating symbols none of them understood. Mari paused. There. She pointed to a small room through the glass. Inside, 3 children sat at a table, hooked to wires. Eyes closed, Jake whispered, "Dream simulation." Ella stared, horrified. "How old are they?" 6, Cass said. "Maybe 7. The hallway opened into a security bay. 1 guard, unarmed. Jake moved fast, pinning him, dragging him into the supply closet. They took his badge and scanned the terminal. Diaz tapped through surveillance feeds. It was bigger than they thought. For dormitory wings. 2 memory archive rooms. 1 joy induction chamber. Cass whispered, "That's where they rewrite emotional responses, where they make pain feel like reward." Jake clenched his jaw. "We need to shut it down." Diaz pointed to the lower level. "Main servers here. Core of the system. It goes down. Everything collapses." But then Cass said something none of them expected. "We can't just destroy it." Jake turned. "Why not?" She clicked into a deeper folder. The screen flickered. Lines of code. Photos. Documents stamped with government seals. Project names. Echo Rebuild. Civic Conditioning. Emotion Schema Transfer V.6. "These files," she said, "aren't just about these kids. They're a blueprint for more, other programs, other countries. If we destroy the system, they'll rebuild it somewhere else." Ella leaned in. "Then what do we do?" Cass's voice shook. "We leak it." Diaz froze. "What?" "Everything," she said. "The files, the videos, Wren's recordings. We drop it all. Online, everywhere. We make it so big they can't hide it anymore." Jake nodded slowly. "We flood the world with the truth." They downloaded the archive onto 2 drives, one as backup, the other to release. But before they could leave, footsteps, voices. Someone had noticed the missing guard. Cass whispered, "Time's up." They ran through the corridors, down the tunnel, back through the grate, and into the woods. But this time, sirens followed. Not loud, just a pulsing hum, a tone that rose through the forest like a signal only guilt could hear. They split up, Jake with Mari, Cass with Diaz. Ella lingered, then followed the sound of her son's footsteps, heart thudding like a drum inside her ribs. They regrouped hours later, miles away, at a rest stop on an empty highway. The moon hung low. Their breaths came ragged, but they were alive. Jake opened the drive. All the files still intact. Cass said quietly, "We need to send it now, before they find us." Diaz connected the laptop to his satellite uplink. He hovered over the final prompt. A button that read, "Broadcast all." Then he looked at them. "You ready for the world to see?" No one answered, but they all nodded. Diaz clicked. The files began to upload to cloud servers, email chains, encrypted forums, news outlets. Within minutes, it was everywhere. The world didn't gasp at first. It paused, blinking, processing, trying to understand the avalanche of horror and design and science and pain. But by dawn, it burned. News anchors interrupted regular broadcasts. Hashtags flooded social media. Pundits screamed into cameras. Former researchers came forward. Whistleblowers confirmed details. And in the middle of it all, a video played again and again. Wren, standing in her white room, saying, "You are the seed. You are the test." And below that, Jake's face, Cass's, Mari's, not as monsters, not as mysteries, but as survivors. Cass looked out the window of the van. "This isn't over," she said. Jake nodded. "No," he said, "it's just beginning." The world didn't change overnight, but something in it shifted, like a tectonic plate under pressure for decades, finally cracking. The files they released were downloaded 10 million times in 48 hours. News anchors struggled to explain the depth of the horror. Lawmakers scrambled to issue statements. Protesters gathered in cities from New York to Tokyo, holding signs that read, "Our children are not experiments." Truth doesn't forget. The government denied involvement, then admitted limited oversight, then blamed private contractors, then blamed no one. But by then, the truth was already burning through every screen, speaker, and soul. Ella didn't speak to the press. She didn't need to. Her son's face was now known everywhere, not just as Subject Red, but as Jake Matthews, born November 12, 2005, abducted August 14th, 2008, found 17 years later. Mari's story followed, then Cass, then Ezra, who finally came out of the forest and stood before cameras like a man remembering how to breathe. The children of Delta Branch were removed from the facility, gently, quietly, each one given a name, a guardian, a place to begin again. But beginning again isn't the same as healing. Some wouldn't speak. Some had no memory of what came before. And some, like Jake, remembered too much. He stayed with Ella in a small rented house on the coast, where no one knew them, where silence could stretch out between moments like a bridge instead of a noose. They cooked simple meals, walked in the morning, watched old movies. One night, Ella brought out a shoebox. Inside, baby photos, drawings, a lock of hair tied with blue ribbon. Jake stared at them like they belonged to someone else, then whispered, "That was me?" Ella nodded. "You used to laugh in your sleep." He smiled, almost. "Now I scream." Ella reached over and held his hand. "Then scream," she said, "but not alone." Cass started teaching again, not at a school, online, a course called Memory and Resistance. She filled it with truth, with science, with warnings, but also with stories. Stories of survival, of pain turned into purpose, of how to grow something beautiful from something broken. She ended each class the same way. You are not your programming. You are your memory, even the ones they tried to steal. Diaz kept moving, interview to interview, meeting to meeting. He sat before tribunals, testified before panels. And when someone asked why he'd risked everything for a group of lost children, he answered, because they were never lost. We were. We lost our way when we allowed silence to swallow their screams. Ezra never gave a statement, but a photo surfaced weeks later. Him standing outside a courthouse, in a suit, clean-shaven, eyes fierce. A note pinned to the photo read, "This time, I speak." And Mari bloomed. She chose a new name, wrote it on the inside of every book she read, asked to learn violin, danced barefoot in the backyard when it rained. Ella watched her one morning, twirling in the gray light, and whispered, She remembers joy. But not all stories end neatly. Not all wounds close. Wren was never found. Some said she fled to South America. Some claimed she'd been silenced by those above her. And others believed she never left, that she'd simply become someone else. A face in the crowd. A voice in the system. But Jake didn't care. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was looking forward. One morning, he walked into Ella's room and said, "I want to help them. The others, like me." Ella smiled. "Then that's exactly what you'll do." He started a foundation, small at first, the Red Line Initiative, named for the color they once used to mark his file. Its mission: find the hidden, free the silenced, protect the forgotten. It grew faster than anyone expected. Letters poured in, donations, volunteers, some from survivors, some from strangers who simply believed. And one day, years later, Jake sat on a stage before a crowd of thousands. He took a deep breath, then said, "They told us we were not real, that our grief was programmed, that love was a glitch. But they were wrong. What they didn't understand was that the heart is stronger than any experiment. You cannot erase the human spirit. You cannot program away hope." The audience rose, not in applause, but in silence, a silence thick with reverence, with truth, with the knowledge that stories like his matter and always will. And maybe, somewhere tonight, a mother still searches a magazine rack, still scanning faces, still praying, still whispering a name she hasn't spoken out loud in years, because she believes, deep down, that truth doesn't vanish. It just waits for someone to see it. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. Tell me where in the world you're watching and what time the truth found you.